We really should have waiting parents, not waiting children. Over 100,000 children are available for adoption through the U.S. foster care system, and 27% don't have anyone, like a relative or foster parent, in the process of adopting them. 60% are between the ages of 5 and 17, and 2/3 are part of sibling groups of 2 to 8 children. Hey listener, my name is Marcy Bursack. My husband and I chose adoption as our plan A. After blogging about our journey adopting a sibling pair, I began mentoring families right in my own living room. That passion grew into the Forgotten Adoption Option, a nonprofit I now lead as a volunteer while working full-time in the tech industry. From my blog, 3 books, app, and classroom lesson to now a 45-minute course called Foster Care Adoption Simplified, which you can find at ForgottenAdoptionOption.com, I've created practical, heartfelt resources to help families navigate the foster care adoption process. As you listen to this episode, I encourage you to ask yourself, who in my circle needs to hear this? It's often people in what we call helper professions, people like therapists, nurses, doctors, police officers, firefighters, social workers, and teachers like my husband. These are the people who tend to step forward to adopt children from foster care. But this work isn't only about becoming an adoptive family, it's also about becoming an advocate and ally. Every waiting child deserves not just a forever family, but a community of people who champion their future. Whatever led you to this podcast, I am thrilled that you are here. My mission is simple, to help every waiting child be with their forever family. And that's exactly why I host this podcast.
Welcome to the Forgotten Adoption Option podcast. In this episode, we're going to discuss school and church accommodations for children who've experienced trauma. As my husband and I were navigating getting licensed to adopt through foster care, this is like a decade ago, folks. We met Anna and her husband Travis through a young married small group at church. It's got to be a lot longer than 10 years, Anna, because we're married 16 years this year. So a while, just decade plus ago. You actually might recall meeting Anna during season 1. So this is years ago, the very first year of this podcast, when she and her husband Travis talked about adopting their daughter through the foster care system and then having biological children. So Anna, welcome back.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
I always love a chance to see you. I do have to tell listeners that before I tell you more about Anna and how incredible she is, what we're going to learn from her, I want you to know that she's to blame why I am able to serve all of you across the country and bring content, because when the world shut down with the pandemic and we could no longer have people in our homes, or we really didn't because of what was going on, I stopped coaching families in my living room. And I don't know if you and Travis message, I think it was a message somewhere, you had friends, you'd moved to Michigan from Missouri, and they said, Marcy, I need you to coach these people here in Michigan. And my response was I don't live in Michigan. And of course they knew that, but they were oh, I'm sure it's not that different. And so insert Zoom and insert me coaching families across the country, all thanks to Anna and Travis. So I want you all to know how just incredibly special she and her husband are to my family. But since that episode 4 years ago, through her own lived experience, Anna has discovered a gap for adoptive families. That led her to obtain trauma training, become a master individualized education plan or IEP coach. I know it's a mouthful. And she's a special needs church consultant. We're going to dive into some great things she's learned that she can pass along. And what Anna is up to is highly relevant for both current and prospective parents, educators, administrators, and all of us that are part of this community. So I'm sure there's something you can take away and either share with someone else or apply to your immediate family. So Anna, seriously, I'm just so excited to have you back. So we might need to rewind. Some listeners might not have been there yet or haven't gone back to your episode. Remind us, how old are your kids now? And can you refresh us on what led you and your husband to adopt through the foster care system to begin with?
Absolutely. So let's see, my oldest daughter, so our neurospicy adopted daughter, she is 9 years old. And we had always known that we wanted to grow a family, and then it was just happening a little slower than we wanted to. And really, you and Nathan just kept coming to mind. And so after I had my first miscarriage, I was I think God wants us to try and do this a different way. And so through a story you'll have to go back and listen to because it's just so incredible and such a God story, we were able to adopt our daughter as an infant. So I think her birthday's in January. We adopted her in February. So really just right after her first birthday. And then it's just been a journey because since we had her so young, a lot of stuff wasn't showing. So, because a lot of times you don't see like ADHD, autism until later. So, we had no idea what we were getting into. And so, it's been quite a journey. And then God surprised us with our 5-year old. And then he really surprised us with our 3-year-old. And so now, we are quite the chaotic family, but we have a lot of fun with it. And we have taken what we have learned with our daughter and what she's gone through and her diagnosis. And God has just inspired me to take that out into the world because it's hard out there for kids who come through foster care, who come through adoption, because adoption is a beautiful thing, but there's also that other side to it that there's been a lot of pain there too. And so fortunately that there's a lot of healing that can happen in relationships when it comes to when we've experienced trauma. And so that's what I like to bring to the IEP table, and to let people know that your brain is the only organ in your body that needs other people to develop it. And so when children experience a huge break of trust, which is trauma, at that young age, their brain literally becomes rewired. But the good news is that your brain can also be healed through relationships. And so after being on this special needs journey with my daughter and a few years into school, I took some trauma training because it was really starting to become evident that there's something else going on. And so after getting the trauma training and looking at how that can affect someone, because what comes out as anxiety or ADHD or even autism is a lot of the same like symptoms or behavior you see from trauma. And so if you're ignoring this part of your child because it's painful, then you're missing a part of them and a part of what their brain needs. And so something as simple as allowing her to have access to Cheerios, which is a crunchy snack at all times, greatly improved her behavior because it touched on food security, touched on sensory needs. And so it was just such a win. And I'm like, this is so simple. Do people know this? People need to know this. And that's just how I got started. And here I am.
Learning, like I should teach other people. So a couple questions to follow up on
Yeah.
that. So your daughter is your oldest, and she was
Yes.
adopted through foster care, but the two younger ones, you adopted them? What's the
They
story?
are my biological children. Yes. Yep.
To get a nice blended family. And then for listeners that are going, all right, Marcy, she adopted an infant. We know this doesn't happen a lot. We need to kind of break things down a little bit if that's okay for
Yeah.
timing. You finalized the adoption, went to court at almost her first birthday. How old was she when she moved in?
So she came into care at 3 months. She stayed with a friend of ours for 3 months while we were finishing our license. And that's really where the unique part comes in. So one of our best friends who has adopted my daughter's biological older brother and older sister, they had actually been in foster care on and off for 3 to 5 years. And so then when my daughter came in at 3 months, the situation was so bad, the judge went ahead and just went through termination. So I came in on our friend's coattails. So what usually takes more typically like your 3 to 5 years, we got in on the end of it because of the case, how it ended with our daughter. So it is
family history.
Yeah, very unusual situation. It moved a lot faster than you typically see because there was other family history outside of our home, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And listeners, if you listen to Jennifer in season 1, she also adopted an infant, so it does happen, but there's usually these unique circumstances. I'm just pointing it out because if you are wanting or you know anyone who would adopt a baby, I highly encourage you to pursue private infant adoption because you can definitely get a baby through private infant adoption, through foster care adoption. It is super uncommon, and you're usually looking at a 2-year-old or older. So just calling out. Anna's a good example of how it goes unique, but it doesn't always kind of go unique. So you gave us a little bit about kind of raising your daughter and like seeing these things, and through your own kind of parenting, you're going, I could like teach other people what to do with this. And so now you coach families through asking for and shaping their IEPs, which for those of us that may have children, or my husband's a teacher, I feel like we drop this word. So an individualized education plan, which is basically like how do we accommodate in the classroom and in school. I'm wondering if we can kind of level set there, Anna, and just talk about like what exactly is an IEP? Because I know there's also this like 504 thing. So they're like the same but different. So can we just start with like what on earth are we even talking about? Acronyms can be really confusing.
Absolutely. So if you're in your adoption and foster care journey right now, you're probably getting hit with all the acronyms. So what you typically see in especially with your foster care is they go through a lot of screenings. And so usually for our state, it's early on. We'll start to kind of alert you if there's some like developmental delays. And that's helping prep you for what you might experience once you get to the public school. But when you get to the public school and you're seeing that your child might need extra supports, you want to start having that IEP conversation with the school administration and the teacher. So you'd start by saying, I want a comprehensive evaluation for special education for my student. Long way to say, I want you to do all the testing to see if my child could benefit from an individualized education plan. So of the IEP and the 504, your IEP, you have to qualify for under one of 13 categories, and it has to be a more formalized testing situation versus your 504, it's not as difficult to qualify for. For example, if a student has ADHD, a lot of times 504s offer great support, and you're looking at accommodating that student, usually in the general education classroom. So on a test, they might need extra time. Versus with an IEP, it needs not just only an accommodation, but sometimes a modification. So for example, I have some students that because of their struggles to focus, they can't read a full page on a book. And so in their IEP, we have the teacher prepare a modification of their curriculum to where they're only reading 2 sentences at a time. So the easiest way to say is your 504s are going to be more about accommodations, where your IEPs are going to be more about modifications to meet a student's needs.
Super helpful clarification. So hopefully listeners, I know it gets a little mucky, but we were trying to just make it really easy. I have a child that has a 504, and we were told that that would be easier to navigate given the needs that we had, that it wasn't because there's just a lot more paperwork. And I'm curious if like you find that to be true. So if there's listeners that are thinking, I think things that are mentioned is like preferential seating, meaning like maybe front of the classroom, the teacher checks in on different things. I'm curious, like if you've seen kind of 504s move faster than IEPs, but maybe because the needs are totally different too, that it looks different. What's your thought there, Anna?
Yeah. So the big thing that I find, especially with focusing on trauma, where our 504s, so 504s can fall short in that they are not, they being teachers and admins, are not legally required to track progress like you are in an IEP. And a lot of times, if behavior is a big concern, which you see a lot in trauma, your 504 isn't going to offer necessarily as consistent supports as an IEP, because again, they don't have those same reporting and legal requirements in a 504. So we had a client that or a family that I worked with this last year. She was going into 9th grade and she had something like 26 suspensions and only had a 504. That was just for her ADHD. The family had been denied an IEP evaluation, so twice. So we went in and was able to get the school to see like there's more going on here than just ADHD. These behavior problems are linked to PTSD and her trauma background, and got them to agree to an evaluation so that she can have those safeguards and supports that she needs in school. And because you can't suspend a student for a behavior that's linked to a disability. And that's where we see a lot of times when your PTSD comes up. Because, man, when a child's brain is in survival mode, like they just see the world completely different. And they need those supports to be able to sometimes just take a breath to see what's going on in their environment, because their reality when they're in fight or flight is going to be different than your neurotypical reality of like the teacher or the administrator in that situation.
I remember learning about so PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. I remember learning in our classes about how relevant that was to children. Like I think at the time it had like just been added maybe to the manual,
Mm-hmm.
the psychological manual, like DSM-4, whatever it's called. That like children could be diagnosed with it, especially through trauma. And so, Anna, for those that are listening that might be like maybe a counselor or a therapist or in a school setting, and maybe this is brand new to them, can you give them kind of a quick intro to like where PTSD and just children who've been in foster care, kind of what that might look like or why that's so common?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, in PTSD, sometimes you see that diagnosed a lot. Other times you'll see it come up sometimes as even like RAD, which is reactive attachment disorder, or ODD, which is oppositional detachment something. So all very similar. And what that
Oppositional
is
defiance
it's order.
disorder.
There we
Yeah,
go.
I know. All sorts of
Even I
acronyms.
struggle with the acronym, you guys. It's alphabet soup. I get it. um, and so you'll see it's these unexpected behaviors. That's the best way to see trauma, the way I see trauma manifested. Because again, when trauma happens to a child, it changes the way their brain works. And so if you think about how our bodies are wired to react if we see a bear chasing us, everybody's going to run or they're going to freeze and play dead. That's your body's natural response. Well, when a child has experienced trauma, some of these kids feel like they're being chased by a bear all the time. And so that's where the PTSD comes in. That traumatic stress has made it to where they're always feeling like they have to fight. So if a teacher does something as simple as, puts a hand on a shoulder, that could completely catch a student off guard. And you're touching me. I told you you can't touch me. And that is what most people would see as an over exaggerated response. Usually that signifies that there's been some trauma that's happened. And especially with not just foster care, but even international adoptions. I had one child who grew up in an orphanage, and it was problematic that one of her classrooms had like the cinder block walls. They were painted, but it's still like it triggered something. And so, okay, let's put some posters up. What can we do to change the feel of that room? So looking at why a student is reacting a certain way, because I love to say like behavior is a form of communication. And with our trauma kids, a lot of times it's not going to make sense to us, but it's something that has their brain ready to, fight that bear. And that's just not a way to live. And so they deserve us to do better and to help them so that they can function in a place in their brain where they can learn.
Super helpful. So now that we kind of have a little bit of background on like there's IEP, this is 504, there's accommodations in the
Yes.
classroom.
Yep.
Can you share some examples of kind of some accommodations that are common that you see among children who've experienced trauma? Because I'm imagining you're working with what, elementary, you mentioned a high schooler too. So are you the
Yeah.
gamut
So
there?
yes, I usually work with younger kids, like high school, or not high school, that'd be the opposite, elementary age. So I usually work with elementary age families. So one thing that is that I have brought to the table for a lot of IEPs is really working on the connection with the adults in the school. Because if you do a quick Google search for like accommodations for ADHD, you'll see the preferential seating, extra time on a test. And some of our students need that. But our students who've experienced trauma have such a high threshold, so a high need to feel safe, that they're going to need to feel connected with their teacher first. So one of the families that I worked with, their daughter had a very high threshold for needing connection, and she wasn't getting it from peer to peer, because still is at a young age where it's like the kids were just too young to know how to interact with some of her behaviors. And so we had it written into her IEP that every day on the way to class, she'd stop by the office and there would be an adult who was not an authority figure in any way. So not a teacher, not a principal, no one who would be like, ever be like, sit down. Just someone that could be like, hey, how are you? What'd you do? And so you're building that connection and making school a safe place. So you're helping, to get technical, the amygdala, which is what tells us to fight or flight. You're helping calm them by creating that connection to school being a safe place. Because again, trauma will show up as unfamiliar noises, smells, sounds. And I mean, think about a little, 5-year-old walking into a school. That's all new sights, all new sounds. Kids are unexpected. So having that connection piece is key. That's also why you see those teachers who will do like an individual high five with their kids like every day when they come into school, is huge because one, you're creating one-on-one connection. There's also some sensory needs being met through heavy work. It's just a brilliant way to improve that felt safety for a
Tell us
kid
what
to
heavy
get.
work means. Is that like
Yeah.
the touch? Like,
Yeah. So heavy work is anything that's going to, well, it helps regulate your body, and it's any like push or pull. So like a high five.
Anna is showing
Um,
me what a high five looks like for
yes.
you listeners that might not be aware. She's like tapping
In
her own
case there's
hand. You can
any
just imagine.
confusion. Yes. But like a high five, let's see. Oh, sometimes in church, they fall for it every time. I'm like, let's see if we can push the wall over, and like get it to move because it's pushing, it's using those big muscles, and that regulates their nervous system. So again, that's giving them another layer of felt safety in that room. So one of my tricks there, just have them push over the wall. They never get it, but they always try
Yeah,
real hard to push over that wall.
that's so fun. And so you just touched on churches. And
Yeah.
as we prepared for this episode, you were telling me that you've been taking what you're learning kind of in the classroom and schools, and you've been helping churches now as well. So what does that
Mhm.
kind of work look like? Because I'm thinking churches see kids during a service and maybe there's like a midweek or family event. So what are they doing? What are you teaching them?
Yeah, so it's really working with them to create a safe environment for all kids, because all kids, deserve to have a safe place to go and want to learn, about Jesus and the Bible, or just their religion of choice. And I think we as like Big C Church, just religions in general, kind of forget about that. And we think there's a lot of times one size fits all, like read them a story, do a craft. But we're seeing kids that format doesn't work for them. And so I help churches because we had to, do this for my own daughter, because my husband's a pastor, so we're in church every Sunday. And so again, a lot of it was born out of necessity for her, but then it was just eye-opening to like, this is something where like there's families that really need support, because I think the statistics, some say even as high as like 85% of special needs families don't go to church because they don't feel like there's a program there for their kids. So which is,
Buzz is huge. So
yeah,
basically, it's like, and I've seen this happen. Yeah, you just don't feel like you can do this. Like there's
yeah.
something that's you can't really sit and be part of a service because
Hmm.
you're aware of the needs of your family and that something could be a trigger in different things. So thanks for calling that out.
Yeah. Oh, I remember this was right after, our church here in Michigan, that we were able to go back to in person. and our daughter was in preschool. And so trying to get preschoolers to do 6 feet apart and stay in a little like rectangle on the
Yeah, good
floor,
luck.
yeah, wasn't, and especially wasn't working for my child. And so I was getting called out, and I'm like, okay, this isn't going to work for her, but I want her to have this experience. And again, that just really kind of started to open my eyes to what we can do better. So I work with churches to train their staff or their volunteers on what it looks like, because you'll see a lot of what we call like stemming or certain behaviors in a student that is telling you they're becoming more and more unregulated. Because I'm sure many of your viewers like always have to be chewing gum or like chewy candy versus hard candy or only like crunchy snacks. Those are all sensory needs that we've learned to cope with. Or if you're always like shaking your leg and tapping something, chewing on a pen, again, you're meeting your own sensory needs. We just have students that aren't able to do that for themselves yet or have greater sensory needs. So I go over training of like our basic sensory needs, what it looks like if a child is needing more of something, and then how to incorporate that into class in a way that doesn't single out that student. So like a lot of times if I'm teaching our Sunday class, I'll just be like, well, everybody stop, give each other high fives. Because again, that's that heavy work. It's fun and it's regulating the students who need it, but I'm not calling them out. We had some students who needed to spin, they needed that sensory input. So then we started doing pin the Bible verse on the Bible. And so we would spin them 3 times and then they'd have to go try like pin the tail on the donkey.
Yeah.
And so creative ways to meet those sensory needs to make church and schools feel safe without singling out the child. So it's an inclusive experience for them. So,
It's like a
yeah.
Schoolhouse Rock quote here, like knowledge is
Yeah.
power. It's like when you can become aware and incorporate
Mm-hmm.
some of these things, that's just so interesting. And I'm like, I feel like there's just so much we can learn
Mm-hmm.
from just being aware of some of these things. So I'm wondering, like, okay, let's say I'm a listener and I have a child who was adopted, whichever way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Internationally, through foster care, privately, whatever that was. And maybe I already have a current IEP or 504. I'm curious, now that I know what I know from Anna, what advice would you give us based on kind of what you've shared?
Yeah. So I would say to address the trauma need head on. That looks a little bit different for everybody, but because I, for the longest time with my daughter, is like, oh no. Well, one, I thought that I could like love that out of her, like that I could make up for all of that. And that's not how trauma affects the brain. And so addressing the fact that there's trauma elements here at play, because trauma can even happen in utero. And that's something as adoptive parents, we have, of course, absolutely no control over. So, first, addressing that, okay, there might be some trauma factors at play here. And then when I speak, call it your trauma lens. So imagine, it's glasses. Put on your trauma glasses.
Anna has glasses on, folks, and she just took them off. So just imagine this. She's really trying to teach us some visuals. It's
I'm
great.
really, yes, yes. Because hey, everybody learns differently. We have visual learners. But just putting on those trauma lenses and saying, okay, if my body's in survival mode, I'm going to be looking at, am I fed? Am I hydrated? Am I rested? And meeting those 3 needs first, because you are not going to be able to go higher in your brain. Like I call it the upstairs brain. You're not going to get to that upstairs brain where you're able to learn if those 3 things aren't being met. We had a child that I worked with that would always consistently nap at home still into like second and third grade. And so in their IEP, we had after lunch a rest time. That didn't mean that they had to go take a nap, but went and worked a lot of times with the school counselor and did whatever their sensory preference was for 20 minutes. So giving their body that rest So then they can go back to the classroom and they can hopefully access that, top brain and learn. So just looking at, because those three needs are fundamental, and if those needs aren't being met, they're going to exacerbate every other thing you're happening. Because think how we are when we get cranky and tired. Or if anyone's ever heard the term hangry, like you're so hungry, you're angry, like that happens to children too. And if there's been trauma where they didn't know where their next meal was coming from, that's again something that they're always worrying about. It's always in the back of their mind, even though we know they'll have lunch, but they don't know that. And there's creative ways to address that, that works for your students. So you have those trauma lenses on, okay, food insecurity could be a factor here. Well, let's do a visual schedule so they can see where lunch is. Let's have snacks available to them where they have to ask, they have to get permission, but the answer is going to be yes. So that's giving them confidence, because another thing to throw a little extra in there are neurotypical and trauma affected kids hear statistically no so much more than they hear yes, and so much more
interesting
than your average kid. So by giving them access to snacks, you're addressing their food insecurity. By making them ask for it, you're teaching them appropriate social boundaries. By saying yes, you're building a connection and independence with them. Something simple that most teachers can do, and you're addressing your child's trauma and the way their brain's been rewired in a way that's not only going to heal them, but it's going to help them learn.
Examples. I love learning from real life. I'm like, okay, those are interesting scenarios. Okay, so let's say I'm a listener that has not jumped through any of these hoops yet, because let's be honest, this takes some hoops. Like you have to really advocate.
Absolutely.
As is the whole process of adopting through foster care. You just really have to advocate. What would you say, like what next steps would you recommend for folks that have never journeyed on this, that might be thinking about it? And how would they know if they even need to do something, like to take the next step?
So in theory, each state has programs set up for children as they're growing up, to where your pediatrician or your preschool staff should tell you if there's signs of a developmental delay. But if that doesn't happen, what you want to be looking...
Anna, I want to insert one more question in here. Yeah. What happens if I do private school for my kids? Are the resources completely different?
Yeah, there's resources there, but they can play out different. But there's still IEP supports. It just depends on what level they can meet. I've worked with some private school students as well. Yeah, just looks a little bit different, but there's supports there for you. So when you start seeing more is just going on than struggles at school, they aren't wanting to go to school, they're becoming, again, those overreactions to having to do homework or having to go to school, and you're something's just not right, or they're really struggling with math, you can always in writing, using my hands to highlight that, to say I request a comprehensive evaluation for special education services. And they have to respond. Each state's different, but it's usually within 30 days. Worst case scenario, you ask for those evaluations and they say, oh, no, your child doesn't qualify for an IEP. Okay, you can sleep easier at night. Or best case scenario, whichever way you look at it, they say your student qualifies for an IEP under one of these 13 categories, or your student doesn't qualify for an IEP under these 13 categories, but we think a 504 would offer some great supports. But asking for it in writing is what's going to get the ball rolling. And then if the school says no and you disagree, there's processes and steps for that too. But
So
There's
helpful.
advocates out there. Yes.
Yeah,
We'll
very
help you.
practical.
Yeah.
You being one of them. So perfect segue. So as we wrap,
Mhm.
how can listeners get in touch with you? Because I know you can help support some of these pieces of the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So if parents or churches are wanting to get in contact with me, just annaberkey.com. So my first name, last name.com. And the next step would be to schedule a consult. So we'll go over really those top 3 struggles that you're having with your student or within your ministry. And talk about what it would look like to work together. And then depending on what you're needing, I have different support packages of what it would look like. And then I'm in the trenches with you.
Absolutely. So helpful, Anna. It's something so needed. And I think sometimes just knowing that like, oh, there's someone in some way, there's like a process to how I can help my child do really well and have support, right, at
Right.
school. And I love this part you're doing within the churches as well, that you're like, well, let's just help the child do really well in all these places and have the right kind of support and accommodation. And I really want to just point out and say thank you when you mentioned about helping it not be just for the one child, that it really is about everyone having support and that
Right.
they're getting the support they need, but they don't have to feel singled out in any way. So I'm just
Yep.
commending the journey you're
Mhm.
on. I'm so excited to see how your own parenting journey is taking you on this incredible path to help other families. So thanks for coming back, Anna. Who knows? Who knows what happens in a few more years? You might
Right.
be back on doing
Yeah, 4 years,
something else.
Marcy. Yeah, we'll see where we're going from there. It'll be interesting always, for
I'm
sure.
down.
Yes. But-
Thank you so much for spending time with us. It truly matters that you listen today, because by tuning in, you're opening your heart to the stories of children in foster care, sparking empathy and starting to see how your unique role, whether as a friend, advocate, or even as a future adoptive parent, can bring hope and belonging to a child or sibling group that is waiting. I also want to personally invite you to reach out to me to ask anything that's on your heart. I promise no judgment. You can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, and I mean it when I say you can ask anything. I know it can feel awkward to ask questions publicly, and that's why I carve out time during my lunch hour and evenings while my kids and husband are at martial arts to mentor others one-on-one. Your questions matter, your curiosity matters, and most importantly, the role you are playing in helping children in foster care matters. Together, we can bring hope and belonging. Until next time, take care and keep the conversation going.